Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV, and for my members, my private group, SFO Continuity, where we'll have some special and exclusive content just for them. Today, collapse, reset, evolution, what the rich, and really everyone, really needs to know. Regimes do fail, historically wiping out many, if not most, of the elites. Look at the English Reformation, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, Nazi Germany. Over several years, I've consulted and created a private masterclass program that I labeled Sovereign Risk and Disaster Preparedness, and pardon the clickbaity title, but for billionaires. But again, some of it will quote unquote trickle down. Today, we're joined by former Green Beret, author, and family continuity expert, EM Burlingame. EM has been an incredible guest multiple times, and if you hadn't heard him before, it's okay. This is standalone and you'll be more than fine. But I do recommend going back on YouTube on my Family Office TV, which of course you should be subscribing to. I have two YouTube platforms, at Family Office and effectively at Family Office TV. Why not subscribe to both? But specifically, I believe on only Family Office TV, you'll find last summer a little bit of quasi a part one with EM. Fall, October of 2023, somewhat of a part two. I don't know if I'd quite call this a part three, but there is a level of logic and sequence in terms of what we did. What is required is an entirely different way of thinking that requires asking very different questions that many of you, even the rich and highly successful, have been historically asking. Finding the answers requires looking, and this is key, outside your normal expert and gatekeeper channels, to the pedigreed outcast who already cut loose and prepared for and understanding what's coming. So given the events of the assassination attempt on Trump over the weekend, the Republican National Convention occurring, and all that's happening, I've changed the order, even to a degree of what I noted in my promotions to my members and others of my questions to EM. Don't worry, timing is not an issue. I've done multiple 2-hour plus interviews with EM in the past. And of course, EM, as I welcome you to the show, I mean, come on, I got the black cowboy hat, you got the white cowboy hat. This is a first ever among my hundreds of interviews. Welcome back, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me. Interesting times we're in.
To say the least. We have a lot to cover. And by the way, I will note, my job is really, and I think that even Rogan and others are like this, we're inquisitive, we're seekers. There are some things where you could argue I'm a pundit and thought leader about. Mainly that would be best practices among billionaires and single family offices. Many other things that are satellite to that, but highly important. I'm curious, I ask a lot of questions, and I look to bring on people like EM who have very strong opinion and facts to help to educate our audience. It doesn't mean that I'm always going to agree, but that's the whole thing. If you're wrong, you learn. You already know what you don't know. Why don't you attempt to learn what you don't know? The problem in this country is having open conversation, what I would even define as debates, and how that's become a little bit of almost taboo because no one wants to engage in it. On that note, EM, let's get to it. As a former Green Beret, and in my perspective, kind of a political historian, what is your take on the assassination attempt just this past weekend of Donald J. Trump?
It was coming. It's been coming since 2016. There have been other attempts, none that got this close, none that probably had this much help, if that's what's happened. And I don't see how this kid could have gotten to where he is without some help. Now, what that help looks like and how it all went down, who knows, right? That's beyond me. And there's some other folks that are former Secret Service and former HRT and folks that have actually done this work directly that have opined on the mechanics and the techniques and the gaps So I don't need to necessarily go into that, but I will say as a longtime infantry kid and man, and then Green Beret and just damn common sense. If your requirement is to protect a very high net worth individual or a very important individual, you don't leave a firing position that's that, like that uncovered roof. You have two of your people on it. You don't use local law enforcement. You don't use anybody else. You have your people on that because that is the most obvious place from somebody to shoot from.
Correct.
We can argue all kinds of other things, whether it was incompetence. So thing folks need to understand about the kind of work that Green Berets do and others, paramilitary guys at the CIA and others, is you count on incompetence to be able to do the thing you need to do. Because if you're going up against competent folks, I don't care if you're Delta Force, I don't care if you're SEAL Team 6, I don't care if you're CIA, paramilitary, Galen Group, or the other folks from that other country that the war's going on right now, you don't succeed against people who are competent. Peers, right? You can take out smaller level folks. So whether it's a matter of pure incompetence or a matter of a well thought out and well executed, carefully executed, or even incidentally executed conspiracy, you still have to have massive incompetence for it to even happen.
I mean, basically, in building my question upon what you just said, was there failures in procedures, effectively ineptitude by the Secret Service and the police and perhaps others, or something worse and more sinister?
Or both. Or both. First off, I don't want to fault any of the Secret Service officers who surrounded the president with their bodies. I don't want to fault the sniper team, the counter sniper team that was up on the roof that did eliminate the target. I was not on the ground. I know that there was multiple participants in the task force that was there at the time. There's communications issues. Again, there's some better folks that have opined on this in great detail. I will say that there is a major tactical error, and that is not having two Secret Service people on that roof. So whether they planned for that in the pre-assessment, which, by the way, you do the pre-assessment for the event, and then you do another pre-assessment the day of the event. So I don't know what the specific instructions were to the supporting elements and to the Secret Service itself. I also don't, it also appears that this counter sniper team on the roof had been trying to get authority, to clarify who that person was and then to get authority. So a lot of times for conspiracies to work, and I'm not saying this is one, but it sure got a lot of the signatures. But a lot of times for a conspiracy to work, it doesn't need to be a whole lot of complex things. There just needs to be delays in final decision making, or somebody has to be just a minute late for a well-done conspiracy to work. And so everybody on the ground can be doing everything right. But if you got somebody in command who can make some decisions about timing and about authorities being exercised, you can have a pretty effective conspiracy. Again, you still need incompetence. You still need incompetence because you have to, even the guys that are on the ground have to assume that there's going to be failures in communications.
Right.
They have to assume that there's going to be failures in identifying who's who, moving. They have to assume that there's going to be delays in getting proper authorities to kill somebody, et cetera. And I don't know exactly the legal SOP. I think the counter sniper teams can fire without that authority, but I don't know that specifically. That I don't know their TTPs and procedures. But you have to, as someone who is securing and protecting somebody, you have to take all of those, conspiracy aside, but just normal difficulties of operating conducting a complex operation in a difficult environment. You have to take those contingencies into account.
What we loosely define as Murphy's Law, the more moving parts there are, you got to assume that things are going to go wrong. You mentioned SOPs, that standard operating procedures. And again, the one competency that I do have is effectively best practices and greatness in a single family office. So some of the principles that you're talking about, although what you're talking about potentially could have more dire consequences, the principles apply to my deep experiences and what I do as well. When I look at that, and maybe more of the latter point you made about the decision to quote unquote take the person out, I look at hierarchy and bureaucracy. Now, there are times where I suppose there needs to be a level of hierarchy. I don't know if there really ever needs to be a level of bureaucracy, but there comes a point in something this critical where I'd like to think that someone who's in position to be someone of a quote unquote sniper has the capacity and the capability to make a decision, because you don't have time for the relay and communications to come back. But I don't know. I might be wrong in that. I suppose I'm asking you, given your experiences, to maybe expand a little more upon your initial answer.
A Green Beret friend of mine posted on Twitter the other day, and I'm gonna paraphrase because I don't remember exactly, but normally there's a 3-man sniper team, and it was a play. It was a funny, sad, tragic, funny, but funny statement, which was that 3-man sniper teams are the sniper, the observer, and a military intelligence guy, because some military intelligence guy was opining on the situation. And I responded with, actually, there is a 3-man team. It's the sniper, the observer, and the lawyer. Because I've sat in the operations center in Afghanistan where we had a very bad guy, dead to rights. We had, with ISR, all the intelligence done on him. We knew who he was, so positive identification, pattern of life worked out. We caught him red-handed going from bad guy to bad guy, setting up a network. I won't go into the details. And we wanted to take him out with a hellfire. Get rid of that. It took us 12 hours to get the authorization to kill him. In war. And this was out in rural Afghanistan. It's not that like we had to get permission because there was going to be collateral damage, et cetera. Finally, when we got the permission, a shift later, right? So a whole transition in command in the ops end for the day. When we finally got permission and hellfired him, he was out by himself on a motorcycle out in the
of course.
But it took us 12 hours to get permission, and that's just one, right? So with respect to the delay in the shooting and the fact that they had eyes on him for 20 some odd minutes, it is quite plausible that it took that long for some lawyer, some decision maker, to get an opinion from their lawyer that they were going to be protected if they killed somebody innocent or a friendly.
And my next question, I say with some needing for care from my perspective, I think the challenge in my community of great wealth family offices and normally investing centric. And by the way, everything that we're talking about comes down to continuity of the family, comes down to preservation, and does effectively come down to money and resources. So these absolutely apply to the super rich and family offices. Too much of what goes on in my community doesn't address these more sensitive topics. Perhaps some could argue, and they do to me personally, that I don't do myself any favors. Again, I look to be a seeker. I'm not necessarily on one side or the other. And if there is something nefarious here, I'm not so sure that it didn't happen from the opposite perspective politically that you may think, or the average public may think it might have happened from. There's an establishment, and we're going to loosely call that the deep state, where someone like Trump and others is potentially a threat to that. And again, I'm not here to judge the moral or character of someone like Trump or others. That'll be for you all to decide. I'm just looking at it from Again, what did I state earlier? I'm curious and I'm a seeker. That's going to lead me to ask questions that, sadly enough, I wouldn't have to give this 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. In today's world, I actually do. So that is going to be the question of DEI and its impact on the lack of meritocracy among our 3-letter agencies, the government, workforces in general, and maybe specifically in this situation. In no way am I saying that there should not be equal opportunity. Absolutely. No matter who you are, you should have equal opportunity. But the outcomes are not necessarily going to be the same. I love basketball. I'm probably not going to be a center of the LA Lakers. I'm not tall enough and I'm just not good enough, period. I couldn't do what EM Burlingame has done with his career. I didn't have the talents growing up. I didn't dedicate myself to it. And that is what it is. My butt is out of there. I do what I do. So the challenges that we have, I think this might be an issue with DEI. And we're finally starting to see the cracking of people realizing the challenges of not basing something strictly on merit.
All right, so give me a second. Before I move to the the merit and die, I don't play the re-lettering. They want you to die, so DIE is what they really mean. I want to also recognize, mostly for your audience and to better frame the conversation, that aside from being a presidential candidate, Trump is a billionaire who has a family office.
Indeed.
Who's a very critical pillar in the business world and the financial world related to his businesses. And he employs thousands and thousands and thousands of people, tens of thousands around the world. And he's deeply tied into the financial system. So take the candidate stuff out. He himself is an ultra high net worth individual with a family office, with all of the, now, of course, there's a much heavier bullseye, as a certain sitting president used the term on him. But he's still a high net worth individual. And when it comes to so now to the meritocracy, we have to be very careful. I don't believe everybody should get the same opportunities, because the only way in which to get the same opportunity is you have to change the definition of the requirement. When it comes to someone's safety, or it comes to the preservation of wealth, you cannot change the definition. And I'll give you an example. This is not to pick on or to denigrate in any form or fashion the female Secret Service officer that was there. My understanding from folks is that she's a very good Secret Service officer, and she's got a long time. She's earned the level of being on a president's or former president's detail. She's not physically large enough. The role of close in with the president of the United States or a protectee is to use your body to cover their body to absorb bullets. You cannot do that if you're a foot shorter than your principal. So while I respect her career and what she's done, and I do not denigrate, this is not about the officer herself.
Indeed.
She should never have been on that detail. Now, she could be on the president's detail because there are other than the expendable body bags, and they're not so expendable, right? I don't mean that quite like that, but the ones that are there to use their bodies to absorb bullets to protect the principal. There are other tasks and other gun using, get in the line of fire kind of things that doesn't require you that you are large enough to cover the entire surface area. Particularly, she wasn't large enough to cover from here up, which is, if I'm going to kill somebody, I'm going to shoot them from here up, right? So again, this is not picking on her at all, not to denigrate her at all. I think she probably conducted herself with, completely properly, right, with honor. but she shouldn't have been there. But she was there because somebody changed the definition of the requirement. So meritocracy is more complex, more difficult than just having, in terms of bureaucratic systems and decision analytics. What we have been steadily doing, and I think they call it the Overton window, right? Is we've been steadily shifting the definition of the requirements for a whole lot of things, for most all things, so that a whole lot of other people can rise up meritocracy, through meritocracy to fill a position that if the goalpost hadn't been moved in the first place, they would never have had the merit to rise up to. And this isn't just in the physical security stuff. This is in decision analytics. This is in, the legal profession, the accounting profession, the managerial professions, gatekeepers, etc. Right? We've lived so comfortably for so long, protected by very rough men and some women. There's some very rough women out there doing some rough stuff, right? We've got to respect the hell out of them. But when the goalposts have been shifted enough that those rising up meritocracy in a system leads you to a place where you have enough incompetence at every level, because this is happening everywhere at every level, you're now in real danger and you don't even know it. Because you are living in an artificial reality. And all it takes is something like what happened last weekend to see the surreality of why that person was on that detail, just for the close-in work, why that person was in that position in the first place. If there had been a second shooter, or if the sniper team had not been able to take him out, when Trump popped back up like that,
right,
that whole section right in his face was wide open.
That is true. Putting yourself in the role of a Secret Service, I was actually going to bring that up. Now, of course, it was an iconic moment, a Trump bravery and hand pumping, but in theory, he was surrounded by, 4 to 5 secret agents, Secret Service agents. Why did they allow that is basically what I'm saying, for the reasons that especially from the other angle in the front with the female agent. And again, I'm not saying not very accomplished, but undersized relative to this specific role. Were they a little derelict in that duty?
I don't think so, because if you actually look, all except for where she was, they actually were covering him with their own bodies and their own heads and etc. So if you look around like this, so back and around like that, he was covered. And there's also a certain amount of what's that?
Not staying static on the ground and moving could be a positive.
Well, normally what they would have done is kept him hunched over, bodies over, and moved him off the stage. But there is a certain amount of the human nature of, you're just not going to stop a guy like Trump. That's a big guy. But by the way, he's a physically big guy, and he was fueled by adrenaline. Somebody just tried to kill him. And the whole ludicrousy of the whole, and the infuriation of that whole system, that man was fueled with testosterone and cortisol. And it would physically be very hard to stop him from standing up.
Do you think that, and perhaps what happened this Saturday, could change things? Do you think that Trump will win, and my words are very specific, will win the election?
I don't know. That's a thing we can't answer yet. We also don't know if he's still going to survive.
True.
Right? We don't know that this is the last.
There is many months to go. You are correct.
Yeah. So I created a meme that's out there on Twitter, right? But once the seals on evil are broken, they're broken, and it's just their murderers versus our murderers at that point. And we're not quite there. The seals on evil have been broken. The restrictions on killing a prince have now been broken. And if you go back historically, back thousands of years, that's a pretty deeply wired restriction in humanity, except for the random crazies. But when a system, a regime is calling for the murder of their princes, and that has been openly called for, right? We've had politicians, we've had political leaders, we've had actors and media people calling for his death. When that happens, when that prescription has been lifted and now the system is telling you it's okay to murder this person, it starts to, unless there is a hard effort to back everything down, and that's not been happening. Biden's back out talking about, you need to take Trump out, and the others are back. It didn't even last a day.
Right.
And in fact, it only lasted long enough for them to say, don't come after us. Calm everything down. Don't come after us, which is really what that was. And now they're back after it. So this is not the last attempt. Oh, by the way, even if he does get reelected, sitting presidents have been killed.
We do know that, that's for sure.
Especially if it's an insider threat, right? Especially if the regime is involved, which I'm going to say right now, I don't see how they can't be. Now, how exactly, how directly, were they intending? I mean, if he hadn't turned his head, the guy had a freaking shot right into his head. He would have been dead.
100%. It's almost miraculous that time.
And in all respect to the family that lost their father and grandfather, I can't remember the name, Campitore, I think, or something. But
of course, terrible.
Great respect to the family and the other two that were injured as well. So back to the meritocracy thing. The problem goes way beyond wokeism. It goes way beyond the DEI. The problem is that with bureaucratic systems, you are constantly moving the goalpost. You're constantly changing the definitions and descriptions of things so that you continue to get your pension, your promotions, and your payroll, right? Mm-hmm. And in heavy managerial class systems, you make sure that the person that replaces you is dumber and less capable than you are, because you don't want them to get into the job and fix all the shit that you couldn't fix while you were there, and identify all of the negative, the ways in which you are enriching yourself over what you're supposed to actually be doing.
Indeed. And a couple of comments have come in. Tom, who I've met a couple of times before. Tom, great to hear from you. He's an Iraq vet, now in the family office community, basically said, well said, agreed. And again, we do encourage interaction with our audience, whether you're in our member webinar program or through one of our live socials, assuming you're watching this live and at the moment, as opposed to in a recording. What do you think of Vance as the VP candidate for Trump?
I'll be quite honest. I had no idea who the guy was. Let me rephrase. I knew who he was as a VC. I actually didn't know that he'd gotten into politics and been elected to office. So when somebody put that he was the VP pick, actually the picture that came into my mind wasn't JD Vance. It was the guy from the movie The Hangover.
Oh yeah, they look so much alike.
They look, and it was like, great pick, by the way. I mean, I meant it humorously, but that's how little I had made the connection about JD. So what I will say this, though, about JD Vance, and to the comment you made about my post there on Twitter, when I was I spent almost 30 years of my life in Silicon Valley in the tech space, both on the entrepreneurial side of things and then on the investor side of things. I know a lot of these people. I certainly know the community. As early as 2000, we were hearing comments that the pitchforks were coming because we could see, some of us could see that what we were doing was fundamentally, in terms of productivity gains through other than managerial improvements, through other than labor improvements, machine improvements, but through data utilization, communications, etc., was going to one day displace a whole lot of people in the economy and give other folks a whole lot of disproportionate power that they probably shouldn't have and would use for nefarious things. And that only became stronger. So as early as 2000, at parties and little alcoves off or out on the balcony while somebody was sneaking a cigarette, because you're not supposed to smoke in California. It's a sin. We were already hearing, right, that the pitchforks
to break that rule here in Connecticut.
So two kinds of things kind of set in motion then. One was to figure out how to deal with the pitchforks, and the other one was to try and figure out, well, I would say three pathways, and I went down one, which took me down this strange thing that got me into SF in my 40s and then everything afterwards. Not San Francisco, but Special Forces. Three primary paths started to diverge then with the power block and the wealth. One of those power blocks and wealth was purely Wall Street. And that was, how do we use all these tools and resources to steal the commons and create enough wealth and enough security around ourselves that when the pitchforks come, we're safe? And part of that is, how do we burn up a lot of the most dangerous in war, right? A generational war, which is what the GWOT turned into. Didn't work. And so now they've been trying to do a global war. Another camp went down, how do we, the other camp went down the universal basic income, went down entrepreneurship. How do we use all these skills and capabilities of building small businesses into medium-sized and large-sized businesses out here in Silicon Valley? How do we get that to more people? How do we bring more people into that? And that's the folks that started all the incubators around the world and the startup competitions, the speed competitions and all of that. A third group, however, went down, so how do we bring more folks into the capital asset owning class so that, not only are they not going to come after us with a pitchfork, but they might actually help us, help stand between us and those with the pitchforks when the pitchforks come. The third group, which, getting to your question now, the third group approached it differently. They realized all these things were going to happen, but that there was going to be a movement by the bureaucratic state and the oligarchs that, at various tiering that are dependent on the state to make a massive power play. And so the third faction, in Silicon Valley, and there's some overlap of all of these, started going down the pathway of shifting power out of the traditional East Coast power bases. And initially that was LA and San Francisco, the Bay Area. But over time, as California went to crap, which breaks my heart, and forgive my language, that Texas started to pour on, right? Austin, San Antonio, and some other areas. And so now it's less about the power shifting to the West Coast, because Oregon, Seattle and Portland have also gone to trash. And it's now more about the West, I would say, versus the East. And that all started 20 some odd years ago. And JD Vance is part of that.
Which relates to my next question. And by the way, again, there's other interviews where EM gave more extensive background information, but to get right into it, we jumped into it today. It's more than just former Green Beret and author of great books and content and a must follow on X. EM has deep experiences in the world of finance, in the world of investment banking, in the world of venture capital. So he's very well qualified for a discussion that really does tie in the concepts that we're talking about, the issues happening, and how it impacts the super rich and family offices. But that follow-up question is Silicon, or is the Silicon Valley Mafia pulling any strings here with Trump to get Vance on his ticket?
Right. So I want to opine something first and put it out there as framing. I don't pay attention to much politics. For me, politics is theater, as it's always been. I do pay attention to power. What JD Vance brings is he's done extraordinarily well in the managerial class at Yale, Yale Law, venture capital. He also comes from abject poverty, comes from a certain forgotten demographic, and has done very well with Hillbilly Elegy, which I've never read and I've never seen the movie, so I'm not and he went into politics. He's a fighter. He's a literal fighter. JD Vance, take politics out of it, take money out of it, take all that out of it, right? The obvious window dressing. JD Vance is the first person to be an elite and a peasant at the same time. We haven't had that in a long time. So aside from any of the other things and capabilities, et cetera, that he may have, personally, again, not paying attention to politics, but paying attention to power, he bridges two communities in his own person and in his own approach and way. And that is power. That's real power.
Very well said. You hinted at it earlier in your response to my prior question. I guess I'll ask it again in a different way, perhaps for some more context. Is there a power shift that I believe you stated probably began to happen around 2000 among what I would call the East Coast establishment and what we may have defined in the past as Silicon Valley, but like you repositioned, maybe more broadly, the West Coast?
Well, beyond the West Coast, you got to remember Micron's here in Idaho, Albertson, Simplot, so we've got major, and then you've got Texas, and you've got some in.
Don't forget Wyoming. Come on, Ian.
Wyoming, well, Montana, but let's say the West writ large, right? Which is also why all the voting and political shenanigans in Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. Yes, there's a power shift, but it's what is the base of that power shift? And I saw you posted that in the follow-on before this. Till really about now, as it's starting to shift, Wall Street, folks have to understand that Silicon Valley was funded and started by East Coast banks with old Fairchild Electronics and then Intel and HP, et cetera. So there's been this pipeline of the banks, the big banks, using this entrepreneurial startup productivity gain, innovativeness of the West Coast to take all of that at the financial capital level and pour that back in through Wall Street, right? Through the markets and the banks. And that means that the East Coast, through those banks and the markets, has been in power the whole time. That's shifting because that system is a parasitic system. It adds nothing. Zero productivity, zero creativity, zero manufacturing, right? Its sole goal is to maximize profitability and not even profitability, to maximize returns in any way it can do that. The West Coast mind, aside from certain areas and players, et cetera, is a creative, innovative, productivity-oriented. Yes, manufacturing used to be in the Rust Belt of the Midwest and the North. Sadly, that's been increasingly gone for a long time. But the point being is that there's a substantial ideological difference between those who come through Silicon Valley, not all, of course, because some are parasites, and the Eastern banking cabal, market cabal mindset. Now, the interesting thing is you need both, right? So I'm not denigrating or I'm not saying you can't have both and you don't need both, because you need both. You do need the capital markets. You do need the bankers. You do need a certain amount of appropriate parasitism, shall we say, because it serves a purpose, a very important purpose. But when the balance becomes too extractive and you're no longer looking at productivity, meaning create things, build things, repair and restore things, actual things, and not just balance sheets and spreadsheets and valuations, you cannot do that with the East Coast mind. And we're at a place now where we're adding $1 trillion of federal debt. That doesn't even count state, county, municipal debt, or corporate or personal debt. That's just federal debt. $1 trillion every roughly 100 days. You cannot right now, if we were to stop and everybody got productive and we did manufacturing, all that, it would take over 100 years to repay that debt. And the way we're adding it, another year or two at this rate, it'll take 150 years. That's what, 7 generations?
Yes.
So I will say it unpleasantly, but I will say it the best I understand, okay? And I've looked at this a long time. Bureaucratic managerial systems are slaver systems. And Herbert Spencer wrote about this back in the 1800s. He did a 4-part series called Man versus the State. It was in the Atlantic. And one of those, I think number 3, is called The Coming Slavery, wrote it in 1885, published it in 1885. And he laid all this out in great detail. And so when you build a slaver, which is a parasitic system that is too extractive, it kills the host. You don't go to pure anarchy, right? You don't regress to some earlier mean that was not a slaver system, because there's never been one of those. So what's happening is, and I also follow further, have looked at people need to be exploited, myself included, at different times in my life in different ways, and even now, because it's what gives us a sense of purpose and meaning, and it's what drives us to improve ourselves at a physiological level. So I'm not also attacking the system, but it's become too parasitic, it's too extractive, there's no real feedback. I'll give you another piece. A lot of family offices have become very wealthy because of algorithmic capital, computational capital, algorithmic capital. The problem is that there is no tie back between that capital and the base economy. And so what's happening is, not intentionally, this isn't, some folks who design the systems, et cetera, are doing it intentionally. But a lot of the folks whose wealth has been improved upon this, the East Coast system, don't realize that while their wealth is going up, that is actually coming at the expense of the people, the infrastructure, the economy, future generations, because and they give massive amounts in philanthropy and they do investments, et cetera, but it's not enough. So we've broken that feedback mechanism that's a regulator on how much is taken and how much is put back, reinvested in people, individual communities, businesses, infrastructure, et cetera. And that's a long-winded way of saying there is another power group that is using the slaver system, who are trying to take power to shift that dynamic a bit to where there is better reinvestment, that there is more of the productivity of the individual that's maintained by the individual, so they can more appropriately reinvest it in themselves and their families, and which will stop this East Coast let's just run up the debts for as long as we can, as much as we can.
I could state when you describe East and West Coast that we could even define that as various factions. How powerful are the big financial institutions and effectively their leaders and those that control them?
They're very powerful. I would say that they're far more dangerous than they are powerful. They're only powerful in an artificial status hierarchy. They're only powerful in an artificial reality, a reality that was begun in the 1600s, 1645, 1649, that culminated in the Peace of Westphalia in Europe, and the 1620s to the 1685 with the beginning of the English Civil War, that culminated in the Glorious Revolution, which was constitutional monarchy. But in essence, what happened, not in essence, in reality, what happened in the early 1600s in the Western world is the parliamentarians and the bureaucrats put in place the framework and the argument and the infrastructure for the current slavery system, which is debt and taxation slavery. So they took power from the hereditary princes and increasingly gave it to the merchant princes and the parliamentarians who worked together, who were the ones that actually made that happen. And we're coming to the end of it. So that's the artificial reality that's been created. So these folks are very dangerous because they have a lot of money and they can hire anybody to do anything that pretty much they want. And that gives them some power as long as people go along with it. And as long as there aren't princes that step forward and say, we're not going this far anymore. And that's what's happening.
More so to your prior answer, but a question did come in, and I do want to respect the audience that does throw out a question. JJ asks, did going off the gold standard make any or all of this possible?
Couldn't have happened without it.
Context, please.
Couldn't have happened without it. So everything in the mercantile world is built off of valuation. And if you have a hard, tangible asset such as gold, that provides, and there's other folks far wiser than I am or knowledgeable on this, but point being is that if you have a hard, tangible asset that you can't artificially manipulate because there's only so much of it, and you have to physically have physical possession of it in the form of tangible physical matter, there's only so much you can do to manipulate and to create an artificial financial economic system. Now, you can manipulate the valuation of the gold, but you cannot manipulate how much gold there is. And you're also participating with the rest of the world, and they all have to go along with it, which is what the whole globalism thing is let's all go along with this shared lie. It's an interesting thing. The one thing that hasn't changed really is the price of gold in terms of relative price, because it still takes the same amount of gold to buy the same things today.
Yeah.
Right? Which is why they're manipulating the hell out of the price of gold to keep it down. Now they're losing some of that control through the oil markets, right? And again, there's folks way more intelligent than I am on this. I would look to some of the work of Jeff Snyder at Eurodollar University. George Gammon, Rebel Capital's talked on it a little bit. Tom Luongo, I think, is probably the better one for the larger.
Thanks to you, I have interviewed Tom before.
Yeah, wonderful. That was wonderful. Yeah. So some of these folks are far wiser or knowledgeable in these things, but you cannot have an artificial system when you have a hard, tangible asset as the base of it. Again, you can manipulate some things and you can lie about some things, etc. But you cannot create artificial valuations, because at some point there's going to have to be a clearing and settlement where the physical asset has to change hands in a hard transaction, and you're going to have to come up with that amount of gold.
True. What does the words deep state mean to you?
Back to the Peace of Westphalia and the Glorious Revolution, the deep state is the infrastructure that was put in, the bureaucratic slave system that was put in place by the Peace of Westphalia and all of the machinations that occurred again from the 1620s, the beheading of the king, and then the bringing in of William of Orange and the Stuart daughter to act as a puppet constitutional monarch. So that put in place in Europe and in the British Empire, and to include the United States, what would become the United States, the new artificial reality, artificial economy. Basically, it put the bureaucratic state in place, and then the colonialism spread that around the globe, particularly the British Empire. If folks want to take a look at the Habsburgs, what happened to the Habsburgs once the empire ended? Boy, they sure still got a lot of wealth. They're still
Now, be careful, EM. Some of them are my friends in Austria.
And they're still involved in banking, right? So the deep state to me is that bureaucratic slaver infrastructure that was put in place in the 1600s and then increasingly across the 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s. And now we're seeing the full extent of it, and it's become so extractive for so many for so long, it's just not sustainable anymore. And it can't be fourth turning like, Neil Howe, Strauss and Howe theory. It can't be tweaked anymore to make it work to extract more from the host.
You mentioned before the verbiage, a difference between dangerous and powerful. How powerful is the position of president in the United States?
Nothing.
So
it's powerful to enact some things for some period of time, but truth of the matter is you don't. People need to understand that even kings and monarchs never got there. Genghis Khan didn't get there because he was just a brute and slaughtered everybody. He would have been killed numerous times. Same with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great and Genghis both survived many attempts on their lives. And they had to build alliances and networks. And that power is relationships. It's always been that way. And this is the problem with Wall Street and a lot of family offices I've talked to, et cetera, is you think money is power, and it ain't. Be gone like that. Or somebody has no money or power at all and feels like they've got no other option, just walk up and stab you or shoot you. How powerful are you then? The real power is mutually dependent relationships that cross generations. That's power, right?
Indeed.
You need to make sure those relationships are not just with peers. You need to be with every socioeconomic class and the different status hierarchies in those socioeconomic classes, right? The prince needs to know his people, from petty prince, petty elite to peasant.
And EM in today's world, and now we're really bringing it back to family offices, specifically directly to family. Does it need to be more than local, community, and even country? Does it need to be international? And truly, wealth is deeper than just monetary wealth. Like you stated, it's a level of relationships, of a trusted, let's go with the word brotherhood. How do you keep on maintaining that generation after generation?
I think, mon ami, that's the biggest question you've ever asked me. That's the
final.
Yeah, that's the big one. I was raised by a hippie mother. Came from a old, very good family, European. I was raised to hate my class. I was raised to hate, business, the 3 Bs, businessmen, bankers, and bureaucrats. I kind of still hate them. Not really, but it wasn't until later in life that I really started to go back and look at that very question. And really, it's been the work of the last 5 years. We would not have civilization if that question hadn't been answered many times by many families successfully. And so we have to look to the past. We like to think with our technology and the decoupling of the financial from the economic, that with these massively, just massive, I don't want to say capable anymore, but these massive institutions and bureaucracies that we've somehow, that Fukuyama's admonition that we'd move beyond history is somehow true, which we are now seeing in no uncertain terms is not true at all. So what it means is the answer to your question is in the past, and not in the distant past, and actually in some parts of the world where the past is still alive, like Saudi Arabia, China. Even though they tried to kill it in China in the 60s and 70s, it didn't work, right? So I don't think there's a simple answer to your question, but I would say that it comes in the form of a question. I would think that the way to answer your question is with a question that people have to ask themselves. I ask myself this frequently. If I lost everything and I needed to rebuild, or I didn't lose anything, but one of my children or grandchildren do, what can I do now to ensure that I can rebuild in my own lifetime, or once I'm gone, that they can only lose so much? And if I have some descendants that are not quite up to snuff, so to speak, how do I ensure that I put systems and structures in place that they can only lose so much without giving power to folks outside the family that might not be so, which is what happened to my mother, might not be so conducive to helping, to not taking it all for themselves. So I would start with that premise. It can all be lost, and it might need to be rebuilt. And I had a conversation 6-7 months ago in Vegas with a billionaire friend of mine. And his comment, quite genuine as a good father, was, it's okay if I lose it because I'm old enough and I've enjoyed, and it's okay. And my children can go and rebuild. Okay, that might have been true 10 years ago, but the world isn't that way anymore. The world that he was able to, all of the knowledge and skills and capabilities he's been imparting to his children are for a world that doesn't exist anymore, is steadily receding behind us. And it's not coming back. So I would start with, how would I rebuild if everything was lost? Or how do future generations rebuild? How do they sustain and rebuild? And primary to that is relationships. How do I orient myself and my family on building and maintaining the proper relationships in the proper ways? Oh, I just saw.
Power are on. It might have took out my Wi-Fi. I'm trying to connect now.
Okay.
You might put the log back in.
Okay.
Give me a second.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to the StreamYard. Let's see how I can do this. It's claiming no internet. We got in an use a part two, one more hour to it. Not having any luck so far. Hold on. Try again. It's telling me.
You might be able to
And again,
hotspot.
I do have power, so it's a good start.
Well, you might be able to hotspot your phone.
I'm logging back in and I'm showing some progress. Be patient.
Oh, good. Although I just had a great soliloquy, and I'm not sure how much of it was lost.
And yeah. Okay.
Here we go.
EM, are you there?
I am.
Okay, so let me give a little context to the audience. Right before EM, and no, it's not some deep state issue taking us out. So if you were worried, I mean, I wouldn't be worried about EM. He's got himself covered. But me here in Connecticut, without my resources, I'll put it that way, in Wyoming, who knows? But we are having a wickedly hot and humid summer. Every day is like the middle of Florida, and we're getting massive thunderstorms. And I'm somewhat rural-esque in Connecticut, with a little bit antiquated in some of our services. So there's no guarantee that's not going to happen again, either losing Wi-Fi or losing power. But I think we have it figured out as best we could. Worst case, if it were to happen and we can't get back on, E&M will do a final second part hour, even sometime tonight, and distribute it to those, my members and those that signed up to the webinar, and make it perhaps even more publicly available sooner rather than later. There's one comment I want to make on what you said, and I think we really covered an important ground there. So the timing was interesting, how you were concluding and basically heading in. That is effectively the essence of my private membership organization that happens to be called SFO, for really Family and Single Family Office Continuity. That's actually the name. Many of you know me more as being very investing centric, and I do love some investments, that's for sure. And I think that's a very important topic and very engaging to a more larger, broad group of audience. How do billionaires and decabillionaires invest? And what could I learn from Angelo's programs and my peer group in terms of what I do? Best practices on structures, taxation, all important. But if you really get down to it, it is that question that I asked where there's not necessarily an easy answer. And the opportunity in today's world, with as it's getting more challenged with technology and our utilization of technology and more loss of freedoms that we're having, it gets more challenged. The opportunities locally in our community, in our country, but also around the world, of developing optionality of certain freedoms and connectivity and maintaining that go to the heart of what I do in my membership organization at SFO Continuity. So, of course, go to angelorobles.com, and that's the reason why it's more than just investing, that as a family of wealth that can make an impact and desires continuity and having access to resources like my relationship with EM and others, preferably on, a preferable basis, that's the why to be a part of it. So pardon a little bit of my infomercial there about halfway through. EM, I'm not sure if you completed totally your comment on the question of continuity, but we are going to get into aspects of that here now in the second half or the second hour. As we're heading into that, you did have a couple of, I still call them tweets. I don't know what the proper word is now on X, if they're X's, and you did hint at some of them, but some of the comments that you made, I'd like a little more clarity on. Those include those who made the bones, the wealth in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship investing into productivity rather than simply returns, to those who know how to create, how to build, and how to grow rather than be quote unquote true parasites. You did go somewhat into this about 15 minutes ago, but now I'm bringing out something that you actually said. Would love to get your feedback.
There are princes, oligarchs, right? But princes who do understand that you have to create and build real things, real assets, things that produce and create, improve the standard of living and quality of life, that you have to reinvest in infrastructure and machinery, plant, equipment, et cetera, right? They also understand that, like my book, The Eternal War, that they are engaged in a conflict with those who don't believe that because they don't understand it and can't do it. And so they have to both create and manage and build and grow the things that do all of that, while also engaging in conflict with those who just want to live parasitically off of other people's productivity, not caring if the host dies. Those people are now, this gets back to the J.D. Vance, this gets back to Trump even. I mean, when you as a nation are facing the largest bankruptcy in the history of the human species, I kind of want a guy that's done some massive bankruptcies in his own life at the helm, right? A guy that knows how to negotiate. And by the way, every one of those bankers that was ever bankrupt with him, and all the investors, they've all reinvested with him. He's made so much money for them. But those who know that we have to get back to building, that we have to move manufacturing, at least some portions of manufacturing, back to the United States, that we have to have bottom line P&L improvements in real assets, not in financial spreadsheets. Those folks are trying to assume the positions of power necessary to both push back against the parasites, which are out of control and are now over 50% of our actual economy. So half of the US economy isn't even real. To say nothing of the algorithmic high frequency trading, skewing of the markets. But half our economy is not even real because it's government spending, mostly in payrolls. It's in pensions, right? It's government spend and social obligations. That's not the right term, but over half of our economy now is not even real because it's all driven by debt, what is debt? Debt is taking the productivity of current and future generations. That's what debt is. It's actually physically taking portions of people's lives. And half of our economy is built on that and growing. And that's just the federal government, right? So we're in a very, very precarious place where we have to start producing things again. We have to start creating things. We have to start reinvesting in our infrastructure and assets that are required to be able to produce and move goods and services and inputs, et cetera, around. And these folks are trying to take that back and push back against the parasites. And that requires a shift away from the East Coast to the West Coast, because the East Coast system post its industrial era, which really started to go away in the 70s of the last decade, the 1970s, the East used to be a production. The East and Northeast used to be and Midwest used to be production centers, but they moved to parasitic centers increasingly since the 1970s.
You also stated on X, and again, you also did hint at this earlier, but we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive. Your words, I guess I'm catching it halfway through, but the audience will get the gist of it. Not while BlackRock controls above 10 trillion and alongside Vanguard and State Street remains committed to, your words, forced behavior, define that. But the part two, no way the bankers will allow the financiers to win. What do you mean from both? Both the verbiage, forced behavior, and that the bankers will not allow the financiers to win?
Right. Another good question. Bankers deal with real assets, collateral, right? Bankers are the ones that deal with real assets, and they deal with the proceeds of the productivity of those assets in the form of deposits, and from which they make loans. Excuse me. Bankers are the ones through loans that actually add to the money, that create the money supply. It's not the Fed. It's the banks, it's the regional banks, community banks, right? So we need the financiers who do the sophisticated, derivatives and financial instruments so that they can provide capital in forms other than the traditional loans from the banks. So the financiers serve a very important function in this complex economic system, financial banking economic system. But when the power shifts, and this happened with the Banking Deregulation Act in 1994, I think, when the power shifts from banks to financial institutions, because financial institutions, and really all this effort started with the leverage buyout days and junk bonds, and folks old enough to remember Michael Milken and KKR and these other folks that were the big LBO folks, players. When high net worth individuals started to make more money off of their portfolio investments in financiers rather than from making loans through the banks or directly through their family offices, it shifted wealth creation from productivity to financial manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
And it shifted power, real power, although it's an artificial power, but it shifted the perception of power in the world from the banks and the bankers and the high net worth folks that provide the capital and liquidity, and the common people who put their money in there as well, and shifted it heavily to Wall Street and the markets and the financiers, who produce nothing. They are only a cost burden. Now they do some sophisticated stuff with derivatives and sophisticated instruments, et cetera, and they do provide some hedging logic to the higher levels of the financial space that is important, right? It is a critical component. But when we did the Banking Deregulation Act that brought down Glass-Steagall, that brought down the 34 and the 33 Acts, for all intents and purposes, we shifted our focus from productivity organized and coordinated by banks and the logic at the local and regional banks to Wall Street, and focused more on how we could squeeze profitability out of things and 401k deposits, et cetera, as opposed to actually building the things that are necessary to build and create things. And so what has happened now is we have very, very large amounts of artificial liquidity, funds, whatever, capital, in these large financial institutions that has nothing to do with underlying actual productivity capabilities, reinvestment in people, communities, et cetera.
Ian, maybe what we'll do now, we're probably ballpark about 70% through. There's about 10 or 11 problems that you identified, and I do have them down here. I read your stuff. We're going to get right to them in a second. But so some people don't necessarily have to wait to the end, although I think in our last segment before some of the Wi-Fi and power went out, we did cover a very, very important question. And this is one of the reasons why I created, in the work that I do, sovereign risk and disaster preparedness. Before I met you, then you certainly added to it. And my network and my dream team and what I'm doing from my perspective, we need to have an in-country plan and to some degree an offshore and out-of-country plan. Some of that involves legal and structuring. Some of that involves financial, banking, and financing verbiage that you may use. And I go back to my travels in Austria and around the world and meeting the Habsburgs and others, and my interview with the 1,000-year-old family, Octavian Pilati, that's up on my FamilyOffice TV when I was in Austria as well. And they talk about land, meaning owning it, about gold, about art, and to some degree about gems, because they're probably going to be the most portable. They're not reliant on electrical systems or technology. Now, some of what I described, mainly land and even heavy gold, will not be the most portable thing in the world. But there are strategies. There are strategies about or around counterparty risk. And we're not going to have the time or some of the proprietary work that I do and that you do. I just found out in interviewing Dr. Craig Kaplan on AI, and I've been very active in AI recently. He's like, Angelo, like, you may give away a little too much of your proprietary info, even in some of the more open forums that you do. You do understand the AI systems are pretty smart. They're going to start to pick up the content that you and maybe part of your dream team may be putting out there, and it's going to be less and less rare and more accessible and not as proprietary as the systems get better. So it's a little bit of a balancing act between what I want to share and what I really do want to help people more broadly. And yet we're also running a business and need to be respectful for those that pay us from a consultative, or in my case, membership and consultative perspective, that we do need to keep certain things proprietary and don't want it to be picked up on broad AI algorithms that won't necessarily even adapt it to how conditions are changing. Yet there might be a time in 5 or 10 years where it's that much better. We shall see. But for now, what could families do that you're willing to share to at least address some of the problems that we outlined in the last hour and 20 minutes?
So first off, I want to state how ominous it was about you saying that when that thunder went off behind you there.
Yeah, it's. I don't know how long the stream is going to last, everyone. It is.
No, I meant you had made the comment about, AI and 5 years being, and then just as you said that, thunder went off the background. All right.
I may have to take out that whiskey now because I don't know how much longer this is going to last.
So going back to the question you asked earlier, right before the power went out, what can families do to be truly multi-generational, right? That's really what it's coming down to. How can you be a truly multi-generational and hopefully many generation family? And that comes down to relationships, as I stated previously. But relationships with whom and for what purpose? And in what way are those relationships established and maintained, not just within, but across generations, and personalities and peoples and motivations and all that, adapt and shift? How do you vet those individuals? Particularly, how do you vet those individuals when you have a quote unquote expert managerial system that thinks that it's going to last forever, which has never happened in human history. And we can see the collapse of it all around us. And, with respect to, and I'll touch on one other thing before I give it back to you for further question, but I spent a lot of time in tech, 40 years, more than 40 years. I did my doctoral studies in computational engineering to understand where we are with AI. I play with AI tools, different tools, numerous tools all the time. Sometimes I play with these bot tools because I want to see where they are. Personally, I think that AI is about to prove that it's nothing like we think it is, in terms of it's nowhere near as capable as we think it is. And that's because, and this gets to the expert thing as well, right? So this gets to the broader question. Alan Turing posed a test of how sophisticated a system is. I don't think that test was the right test. In fact, I think it's the wrong test that's taken us down the wrong pathway to an AI dead end. And what was Alan Turing's, and I'll forgive the term, but bastardize it, right? But what was Alan Turing's test? And that was if you could communicate dialogue with a machine and not know it was a machine. Well, I dialogue with a whole lot of humans that don't know they're idiots. Right? So what I do see the machine doing a pretty good, with a lot of qualifications, I see the linguistic capacities through LLMs becoming more capable than 60% of the populace, but not more than that. And certainly not more than the top 20% in terms of cognitive capacities, et cetera. So I don't see it succeeding. And I test and I look and I poke and prod at almost anything else. So, and I see the same, by the way, with quantum computing. These two things have been presented as the things that are going to allow us to break from the old dependencies of relationships, of people, of needing highly skilled, capable people in different domains available to you with relationships to you, that you actually have to continue as a family, as an individual family office leader, and as a family to continue to develop and maintain. If you want to be a multi-generational family, don't hitch your future on AI and quantum computing. You will fail. You still need human beings. And even should half of the promises of quantum computing and AI come about, you will still need human beings. And not as your little servants to do your hair cutting and your dog walking and all that other stuff. You're going to need highly capable people. Because even if the machine becomes extremely fast and broadly capable, you're still going to be up against other human beings with maybe less than salutatorious intentions.
Excellent. And although I wasn't planning to go down this road, it's probably in certain of the 10 or 11 problems you outlined. One of them is called the mercenary problem. A lot of families of great wealth, they surround themselves with what they deem to be people that are competent, that are smart. And from the world of hedging and protection and security, that may be reliant on people, which on the surface sounds logical. Former, let's call them 3-letter agency folks or various counterparts around the world. And there is a level of experiences and intel that on certain things, I believe that could provide value. But if things were to get bad, we do have to realize how people are paid, where their allegiances lie, and the fact that well, why don't I allow you to very carefully craft your answer to somewhat of a loaded question? We don't want anything to happen, either one more strike where this comes down, meaning lightning or something else. But I think that there's a false sense of security when you're too removed from the day-to-day and the action of your, not only your wealth, but your continuity in your family, where you're reliant on other people to do the work for you. They hold the keys to the kingdom. And if something were to be lawless or something were to go wrong, it really is going to come down to the most ruthless and powerful are going to be the ones that survive.
So give me a second. This is the thing that really matters and concerns me over the last 4 or 5 years. And it gets back to the very beginning of this conversation about Trump, and not Trump as Trump himself, but as an oligarch, a prince. What were all the failures, right? And we can talk about nefarious actions and all that. There's always nefarious actions, even when everybody's doing shit right. Excuse my language again. There are two, when it comes to your safety and security of you and your assets, now and across generations, there are two primary. You have to ask yourself two questions. One, what can't money buy that I really have to be safe? And two, is my greatest security threat a gunfight? And I say this for a couple of reasons. Historically, right? And I had a couple friends, actually. One's a very close friend, who were both billionaires who are not now, whose security they couldn't afford anymore, and both of them had attempts on their lives. Now, in the world today, not in some third world country, right? So how would you conduct yourself in a world where you didn't have the money to buy anything you wanted to, or the money you have doesn't matter because things have reached the point to where this limited pool of very capable people in certain skill sets are paid more by other people, or aren't paid more, but there's a solid relationship established and developed between them and you, that they will come to you and your family's defense in whatever ways that is. And that isn't just, Navy SEALs and Green Berets and former CIA guys. That's also lawyers, really good lawyers, and really good accountants, and really good PR, crisis messaging people, and really good medical, doctors, and really good teachers, et cetera, et cetera. The other part is, right, so that's the first one, right? So how do you, what are the kinds of relationships, or what are the ways in which you have to develop relationships in order that money isn't the distinguishing factor? It's still there, it's still important, right? Sometimes it's not money, it's housing or access to medical care or
water. Right.
So the second part is, and I'm having this conversation with a client friend now, is because he has the ST6 guys, SEAL Team 6 guys that are friends, colleagues in a certain domain. And, they want to sell him a solution. But we have to ask ourselves something. Give me a second. Are these tip of the spear guys, and I won't say I was a tip of the spear guy, even though I was a Green Beret. There's other guys that are more experienced and knowledgeable and capable than I am in certain skill sets, although I was in a certain unit. Do family office leaders realize that these very capable killers actually come from an artificial world that no family is ever going to be able to replicate? On average, for one frontline tier 1 or tier 2 special operations guy, there are 20 to 28 support personnel per person.
Mm-hmm.
There are virtually unlimited logistics and massive logistical capabilities globally. There are huge bureaucracies and institutions that do nothing but support them. And they only specialize in one skill: gunfighting. And maybe some of the intelligence related to gunfighting. Without any of that infrastructure, without all of that massive, what do we spend in the US alone? Close to $1 trillion?
Almost, yes.
Almost, right? And let's say that only 10% of that is related to, although that's a misnomer, because SOCOM, Special Operations Command, has 80 some odd thousand people in it. And it's, over the last 30 some odd years, become a huge part of the budget and all the supporting elements, et cetera. The point is, you're bringing in people whose only real capacity is a gunfight, preparing for a gunfight. And if you're in a gunfight, you might be able to survive one. You're not going to survive multiple. And oh, by the way, if you're in a gunfight, there's all kinds of liability issues that nobody thinks about. I literally asked, family office, wealthy friends, people, et cetera, and They're like, I never thought about that. Right? And oh, by the way, what happens if, so one, is this person actually really, even though they're from a good unit, they've done a lot of good stuff and a lot of respect to them, but do they actually understand themselves? Do they understand? Give me 1 second. The other door. Yeah. Sorry, my teenage daughter is back. Teens. Do these individuals themselves understand that they come from an artificial world? They can't be replicated with a family that they're contracted to as security. That family's not going to be able to afford 20 support people for that one guy. And what is that guy doing? Is he, if the guy's focusing on a gunfight, I'm not sure the family wants to be in a gunfight. Right? So the whole concept and idea of these, guys that come out of certain units and certain elements, one, you can't replicate the conditions that allowed them to be in those entities and do those types of things. And two, as a family office, that's not what you're trying to do. Your greatest threats, are not going to be gunfights. So you have to ask yourself, okay, but you do have to prepare and protect yourself in case, and et cetera. So what is, these folks that you're looking to provide you your safety and security, are they the right people? And are you thinking about your safety and security in the right way?
Those are excellent points. And audience, I hope you're really appreciating this. This is really like incredible content. You tell me on any other wealth management family office platform where you're getting this kind of conversation. I mean, I want to know because I can learn from it too. And I hope it does. I hope others pick up on EM and others that interview him, because I think that's to the betterment of everyone. A personal friend who's very smart and sometimes a little disjointed in his comments because he's so smart, sent me a text. It's a little all over the place. I'm going to try to clean it up. Certain things I think you already covered. Here it goes. His questions are basically about all wars first start as economic warfare. Didn't we learn that with Nazi Germany in World War II? He then goes into the correlation that the Russians have prepared for the outdated economic warfare that the US and the West has done on them, and they really haven't been bothered or slowed down by the economic sanctions and conditions, and their economy is effectively booming. He adds other parts to it, but why don't I stop there? Comments?
I'm not sure what the question is. I agree, absolutely. See, there's something about that folks don't understand about China and Russia. They went through their collapse in the last century, and they're still here. They survived. You there? I don't know if everybody else can hear me. I'm going to pause, though, because he's frozen. Hey. All good. It's all right. It's punctuating the conversation.
screen, by the way. Oops. We are getting a storm of storms here where I am. So I hope it adds a little bit to the unique ambiance. Maybe someone doesn't want, and causing these storms to occur, and my Wi-Fi and electrical connections here in rural-esque Connecticut to be damaged. So what I was saying is I think we're getting some incredible content here. I did ask a question that was a little bit disjointed from a relationship of mine relative to economic warfare, lessons learned from Nazi Germany in World War II, and relative to how we think that our Western sanctions are working against the Russians. And the answer is really, is it? On that note, and it may take us a little off topic, which is why I almost didn't ask it, especially since I don't know how long this is going to last. But if you wanted to field that question, go for it.
Right. Okay. So this actually is a very good feed on from the previous question and comment. So kinetic warfare, a gunfight, is 1% of even actual warfare. 99% of war and warfare is non-kinetics. It's all the other supporting things. So historically, we've separated these into 7 domains: diplomacy, information, intelligence. Well, it's actually information, actually, military, martial, economics, finance, intelligence, and law enforcement. 7 domains in which warfare is conducted always, at every level, all the time, everywhere. In order to be secure, you need to be able to conduct warfare or counter warfare across all 7 of those domains simultaneously. And if your security, which goes beyond your sleeve tattooed bearded guys, doesn't include your attorneys integrated with, your bankers and financiers incorporated with, right? So if you don't have your diplomatic capabilities, your informational capabilities, your martial capabilities, your economic capabilities, your financial capabilities, your intelligence capabilities, and law enforcement capabilities all interwoven together into a multi-generational portfolio of mutually dependent relationships, you're not actually secure. And this goes back to a previous question. This is what history has shown us. This is why the Habsburgs are still around.
Yes.
This is why the German prince is still a German prince. It's why the British royal family and then some of the noble houses are still around. And the ones that are not around now didn't understand that.
100%.
And merchant princes don't understand this because they over-rely on outsourcing 90% of that to the state. Family offices can't afford to do that because the state may not be their friend. Might be now, might not be tomorrow.
Very true. EM, we probably have a series of questions that maybe we'll go through a little quicker. You defined them as we connected in preparation as kind of a series of problems. Actually, some of them we kind of already tackled. Maybe we'll keep it a little bit quick round robin, but just in case, although it looks like the storm has lightened up a little bit, but just in case something were to happen, I don't want people to lose the opportunity of knowing how to, one, follow you, the name of your book, what is your X account, and for those that would be interested in possibly a consultative relationship. So I'm going to go to it. I promise there's more content to come, everyone. But EM, how could they learn more about you and reach out to you?
Yeah, so quick Google search, EM Burlingame. Twitter is where I'm carrying on. I'm not going to call it X. Twitter. And it looks like Elon's coming around to Twitter as well. And I get why he did it. He's had this dream of X since he was, in his 20s. So I get it. But the problems you're referencing, there's 12 or 13 of these threads I've now done on Twitter. Those are probably the best place to go to get the details and then be able to dig through. But LinkedIn, I don't do much there anymore. Haven't for quite some time. The Eternal War, I think, is a book that all family offices need to read. It's a couple hour read, but a many hour think. That's available on Amazon. I have a new one called The Art of Being a Man that is also up on Amazon that I also think's, if you want to dig through my Twitter, you can go find all of it. Actually, I published all of them there first, but I put it together in a book that's up on Amazon as well. And I think that's another critical, because it's not just about men, but it's, we have forgotten how to be men, and we have forgotten how to be princes amongst men. And it is a thing that we have to recover. We have to. And it's not because men rule and control the world, the patriarch. No, because actually that's all a lie. Women have always owned the world. Women have always controlled the world. Women created society and civilization. They maintain it and keep it. We just manage and protect it. And we keep female versus female competition from getting the hell out of control. Because boy, if it does, and you can look at the studies of the likelihood of male leaders versus female leaders to go to war and genocide. And it is heavily skewed towards the female because they are wired for genetic competition and warfare. But that's why the art of being a man. So those are those two there. Twitter is probably the best place to follow me. With respect to the problems, these are specifically oriented towards high net worth families and family offices because the people matter. Humanity matters. We're not going to be able to replace them with machines and artificial intelligence. It's not going to happen. Now, we will make us far more productive and capable and improve our decision making. And it is already doing that, the stuff that's not intentionally biased, etc. But it will not replace humans. So you're going to need people, and you're going to need very capable people for many generations yet to come. Those people need to be safe, and they need to be healthy, and they need to be economically self-sufficient. That has to happen. And the only people who can do that are the high net worth families.
And by the way, those of you, again, EM via Google search, via X or AKA Twitter, feel free to reach out to him, DM, if you prefer for me to make an introduction or reach out to me to
by all means.
Share, feel free to. And there are certain projects on consultative work that we do look forward to kind of teaming up on and being of value globally to families of great wealth. And it'll be a lot of pleasure. EM, I should probably just keep quiet, but I can't help but bring up from a comment that you made, which is why I want to know why I don't get the viral traction that I would like to get relative to other thought leaders broadly in the podcasting community. But you did say some interesting things there. I've been thinking for years, and admittingly, it's gotten more traction in the last year or so as I think people are waking up. But is there a problem broadly with what I would define in the West as masculinity? And what I mean from that is, if I was an enemy, would I look to weaken the American and the Western male, make them less masculine, less testosterone driven, less willing to fight, less willing to build great companies and look to conquer the world in a good way and do amazing things? I look at TikTok in China, which is great and educational for them, and the TikTok here, which is a joke. And I look at people, I'm forgetting his name. He has a beard. He's a muscular guy. He's incredible on marketing and business building. Alex Hormozy. They go so out of their way to not get his TikTok get viral traction because he teaches men to take accountability, responsibility, how to make money, how to build businesses. Am I a conspiracy theorist, or is my thoughts that there could be certain factions, let's broadly call it perhaps China, perhaps Russia, that have a long-term plan, 50, 100, 150 years to weaken the resolve of men and masculinity and basically have us lose our will to fight and our will to build and do great things? Why am I wrong?
Absolutely the opposite.
What do you mean?
Weak men are dangerous. Weak men in numbers are genocidal. And ancient peoples, and by the way, the Russians are an ancient people. The Chinese are an ancient people. They know all of this. It's built into their civilizations. And they're both civilizational people. Weak men are dangerous in your own communities and in the communities that are opposed to you or your enemies. You don't foster weakness in men ever.
I mean, that's basically saying what I'm saying, Ian. That yes,
You
men
don't
that you could argue are simps, men that are effectively, another word that I guess I'm not supposed to say, weak men are the ones that basically a leader could rile them up and cause insurrection both internally and other problems that we could have. They have less of a resolve for the concept of being committed to family, to community. And yes, I mean, we're maybe saying it in a little different ways. You're going to be, of course, more eloquent than me, but I think effectively we're kind of on the same page.
So, with respect to the danger posed by, we're both definitely talking the same thing. With respect to who's actually behind this, we're not yet talking the same thing. I don't want to anger or get kicked off platforms, right? Not that I'd rather not. And I'd certainly rather not with you or for you or get you. But neurologically, biophysiologically, estrogen regulates the world, not testosterone. Everything. Testosterone actually downregulates for violence, and testosterone-laden systems are less prone to emotive-based motivations at the neurological and biophysiological levels. And yes, I participate in research in those spaces with the National Foundation for Integrative Medicine and with my own foundation, Honos. The system that we put in place 400 years ago in the Peace of Westphalia and the quote unquote glorious revolution increasingly has removed the masculine male testosterone regulatory capacity from society, and has dramatically increased the amount of estrogen-based decision-making that happens in our systems. Estrogen-based systems, which are wired at the core level in every cell to engage in genetic warfare. Consciously or unconsciously. The great danger of having a community, even amongst your enemy, of a lot of weak men is weak men will do absolutely anything, no matter how atrocious, to be able to get a chance to have a child with somebody, no matter how unhealthy, ruthless, destructive that woman might be.
It's not a changing topic, because I think it's a great topic. And actually, comparative to a year or two ago, we actually are, quote unquote, allowed to talk more openly about these kind of topics, and that's a good thing. Tom, who asked a question earlier, has an interesting comment. It's a little bit long form. Basically, other than the 20th century, he notes in his experiences at the U.S. Naval Academy that many wars prior to that were effectively religious-related differences. Perhaps another sensitive topic. You disagree. Why?
All wars are all conflict of any kind at any level, everywhere, anywhere, ever, is genetic competition. Whose genes get to match with whose genes, with what resources, relationships, and power associated with in the current iteration of those genes and in the next iterations of those genes. All things. We like to think that there is higher conscious intent on our part that overrides base genetic life functions, and it doesn't. So genetic competition, fitness finding amongst genes drives everything. And we can use religion as the articulate. So artificial reality hierarchy structures are created, and this goes to the broader conversation we've been having. These artificial status hierarchies are created, which give certain members that have risen up in that artificial status hierarchy greater competitive capacities genetically. Their genes get to pass forward, or those that they want to have the genes pass forward get to pass forward. In that, who gets to create wealth, who gets to create enough assets such that they can have a home and children, et cetera, et cetera. That's what drives everything. Take all that other stuff and throw it away. It's used to distract us.
Interesting. Okay, we're going to move on to what EM identified to me as effectively a series of problems. Given that we're coming up on almost 2 hours in, although it's some apparently storm interruptions to energy and Wi-Fi, inclusive of that, we're going to buzz through these perhaps a little more quickly than what had been my original plan. And on top of it, I think actually half of these to a degree we already covered, but we'll be able to shorten up effectively a thesis and an opinion from EM's perspective. And then
folks can dive into them in detail on Twitter. They're up there. If you go to my profile, which is EM Burlingame on Twitter, you go there, you can go to my highlights and they're all there.
Exactly. Actually, especially lately, you've been very open in sharing a lot of deep information on X that honestly, and I fall prey to the same problem sometimes, you should probably save some of that more for your consultative relationships. Your call. Okay, the first one I think you identify as what's deemed to be an overconfidence problem in the regime. What do you mean?
No regime. So above a certain level of complexity, no regime is actually real. It's an artificial construct. And it goes back to what we were just communicating on. It's an artificial construct to give certain individuals genetic fitness and competitive fitness. That artificial construct can be undone in an instant based off of hard base reality truths. And that's what's happening in the world today. And one of those hard base reality truths is we have several hundred trillion, in fact, several quadrillion dollars of wealth that's completely artificial. And now the bill's coming due and we can't pay it. And what does that do to the artificial status hierarchies? Wealthy people whose wealth is based off of, so back to the Russia comment, why are our sanctions not working against Russia? Because they didn't go down the derivative pathway. Their wealth is based off of hard resources and hard manufacturing. The artificial systems can't sustain. And so your artificial system, this gets back to why do wealthy elites get wiped out again and again and again in history? It's because they have overconfidence in the artificial system and they don't realize the system's artificial.
You also identify what you define as the peer problem, belief in fortresses and fortress thinking. What do you mean?
There is no safety or security that is a fixed point of any kind. Trust structure, government structure, network of relationship, anything that is fixed is conquerable, defeatable. You have to be fluid and constantly evolving to the situation, the artificial and the base realities in which you operate. And the only way you can do that is you need to know who your peers actually are. And they're not people that have as much money as you. They're people that are as capable as you are.
Okay.
In many different ways.
You got me hooked a little bit on that one. Expand a little further. If I'm a significant family or family office, what could I do to enhance that? That relates a little bit to what we might have spoke about your network of relationships, a band of brotherhood, a community, a common bond that you're rallying around.
Peers are not always obvious. right? Somebody who operates at your level, at your high level, your elevated level of capacity, may come from one of the 7 elements of power that is different from where you come from. And you may not recognize them immediately as a peer, but they are, because they cognitively, emotionally, regulation wise, and relationship wise, and experience and knowledge wise, actually are your peer. And oh, by the way, you need a relationship with them. And you need to be able to figure out, how do I identify that that person comes from a totally different domain, totally different world, may or may not have any money at all, is actually my peer, and not treat them like a subordinate, because the only thing that I assess a peer on is how much money they have. It's an artificial thing. It can be gone in an instant. And oh, by the way, the folks that didn't survive the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, folks here in America, the American Revolution, etc., didn't recognize that. They believed too much in the regime. They thought that their wealth and power and title was peerage. No. I know people, I've had this conversation with a friend of mine who was taken down as a billionaire. He's not a billionaire anymore. I had a conversation with him before that happened, years before it happened. And I said, you know what? I know people are just as capable as you. Actually, I know some folks that are your peers that don't have he was a billionaire, that don't have a penny to their name, but they can pick up the phone and something happens somewhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, by the way, you might have $1 billion or more. You might not be their peer.
Very good point. Another one that you bring up, I think we did cover, but I'll mention it, the mercenary problem. In moving on a little bit from the mercenary problem, the survival problem, a failure to establish what we just discussed, a strong community. And I think you use an acronym, DIMEFIL, thinking.
Yeah. That's exactly what I've been talking about. The 7 elements of national power of the DIMEFIL: diplomacy, information, military, economics, martial is what I'd say, economics, finance, intelligence, and law enforcement.
And please.
Well, if you don't, when it comes down to, so let's use the French Revolution. Why? There were French nobles that survived, and there were many that didn't. And there were some French nobles that actually survived with a good portion of their assets. Back to the comment you made about the Habsburgs, right? And diamonds and gems and gold and et cetera. But the ones that survived were the ones that had good relationships with their local community, because they provided, because all 7 elements were being addressed locally at least. And that local community ensured that when the guillotine gang came, these families survived and got out. And this is the problem with the Russian royal family, right? The Russian royal family should have survived, should have. But somewhere, to the great shame of my ancestors, close ancestors, when Tsar Nicholas II asked his cousin, King George, for help, King George did not give it. That was a relationship building and sustaining problem. That was failing to understand the peer problem. Right? So you survive. You can't trust your mercenaries. Just look at history. I mean, just look at history. Just look at what happened with Trump here this last weekend. Whether they're state-provided mercenaries or self-contract mercenaries, you can't trust them. There's going to be failures or actual attempts. I mean, look at the Praetorian, right? Look at the Praetorian Guards in Roman history. So you have to have strong communities. And if you're basing your survival, so mixing 3 problems there, right? The community problem, the mercenary problem, the survival problem. If you're basing your survival on mercenaries, hired SEAL guys, hired, FBI guys that are working for you for a paycheck, and you haven't worked out how to embed them into your family as part of the community, and you haven't helped them embed themselves better in the local communities around where you live, you're not safe. And if and when the cartels or the guillotine gang, one being criminal, the other being government criminal, one's private sector criminal, one's public sector criminal, when they come for you, you're not safe.
Another one you know, and we did cover it, but I'll mention it, is the government problem. But moving on from there, there's another one that may have came up in our masculinity discussion 5 or 10 minutes ago. You define it as the cowardice problem, that regimes are not built by the strong for the strong, they're built by the weak for the weak.
Yes. Those who are strong don't need to develop artificial status hierarchies. They don't need to depend on artificial status hierarchies. They can depend on themselves. And, well, by the way, their peers are also strong people and strong across all 7 elements. There's a lot of guys I know that think that they're strong because they know how to gunfight and they know how to prep and they know how to prepare. Okay, that might make you strong in that domain. Doesn't make you strong across the others. And somebody who's from an elite family, you have to be strong across multiple domains yourself.
How do they become that?
That is a great question. They need to overcome their own hubris. And they need to be willing to set aside their comforts. Those seem like simple answers, but they're not, because doing that is very hard.
You mentioned something called a self-rule problem. What do you mean by that?
We are wired to follow a prince, men. Women are wired differently than we are. They are wired to follow. I wouldn't say follow, actually. They are wired to collaboratively compete. But men are wired to follow and support and defend. And you can get into the nature and evolution of that. But that's how we're wired. The problem with self-rule, individual sovereignty, is you need to be capable across all of those 7 elements, the DIMEFIL. You have to put in the time and energy and effort to constant community development. You have to think and act like a prince without this overarching artificial reality status structure. If you're going to self-rule, and this gets back to how does a family office secure itself across generations, you've got to look to the past. These equivalents in the past were nobles. They were dukes, they were earls, they were barons, they were counts, they were viscounts. That's exactly who and what they were historically. And you have to look to that history and see how the ones that survived, the 1,000-year-old families, how did they go through all of this? How did they survive? How did they self-rule?
You also bring up the intelligence problem, that hubris alone does more to blind elites, oligarchs, and quote-unquote princes.
99% of what we think is intelligence work, experts, the output of McKinsey and Accenture and others is pure garbage. Because it's only real, it's only intelligible within a complex artificial reality that doesn't extend everywhere all the time around the world. And this gets back to the Russia comment. Why did we fail? Why have we failed so horrendously and continue to do so when it comes to Russia and the war against Russia? Because all of the ways and the algorithms by which we use to assess the information related to the quote unquote enemy were all artificial. They were true things in our artificial status hierarchy, but they're not true in the real world. Might have made us a lot of money. When somebody's coming after us, they ain't going to protect us.
You bring up an interesting one in the cognitive problem, that powerful institutions and systems are developed by highly capable people in times of hardship, but inevitably become led by those substantially lesser in capability. And I think that's a pretty profound comment if you'd like to expand a little bit.
In the context of family offices, when things are going very well, we give our lesser sons and daughters a chance to sit on the throne. But when times get really hard and there's some difficulties, we need to take them off the throne and we need to sit back on the throne ourselves, because there's some hard things that require real capabilities. And most of us, there is a broad divergence in cognitive capacities amongst humans, even in the same families. Same families in the same generation, same families across generations. The real problem with the cognitive issue, the real cognitive problem is not just lack of cognitive capacities, because that can be addressed in other ways. The real cognitive problem is that if you get two standard deviations in cognitive capacities apart, you cannot understand one another. It's impossible.
Why those marriages don't work.
Correct. And why those business partnerships and why those structures that you put in place to secure your family don't work. What has to happen is you have to make room for the entire spectrum of cognitive capacities within your organization, in the right and family, principality, etc. Because you might be at the highest, you might not, but you might be at the highest level of the cognitive capacity or in the middle. You need to be able to understand the ones left and right of you, and they need to be able to understand the ones left and right of them, and then it just keeps going out. But within your overall structure, you need to be able to understand people from the lowest cognitive capacity to the very highest. And you can't do that yourself. So you have to make room in the structure, in your entities, your organizations, your whatever you're doing, for dialogue and relationships, back to the relationship part, of people, not bring them into the big decision making, right? But you have to understand that you have to have economically viable operations and entities that folks of very different cognitive capacities are involved in. And you need to consciously think across that cognitive divide to make sure that something ain't happening down amongst the peasants, that the pitchforks are coming and they're coming tonight at 3 a.m, or that the prince above you is sending an army and it's coming at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I use those as, extreme examples.
If you don't mind me getting a little off track for 1 second, it indirectly reminds me of a conversation, being a best practices nerd for billionaires and family offices that I am. I had a very intriguing conversation last week. We agree that the number one resource is people, ahead of systems which are created by people and technologies which could go out, but are also quote unquote created by people. Yeah. He was an extreme advocate that, especially since single family offices, even for decabillionaires, are often relatively modest in volume or number of people, that IQ, effectively, people that are high IQ, that think critically. And then I asked him, I said, how about loyalty? How about the ability to communicate? He's like, they're all important. And there are going to be some high IQ people that are not going to be a good fit for your organization. But if you make the wrong decision and look to hire someone who's mediocre compared to someone else who's hiring the right person, who is higher IQ, also loyal, also a good communicator, and you got to pay them a lot of money because they know they're damn good and they're going to have optionality. So this person was an extreme advocate of no disrespect to communication, to EQ, to loyalty. They are all important and they have to be there to a degree, but I don't even look at those things if I don't feel the person is incredibly, somewhat polymath and ultra high IQ. Is that a little unrealistic for the family or family office, or they should all have expectations of hiring the best of the best? One comment that I think it's Reed Hastings at Netflix was believed to have said was 110 is worth 20 eights. And an 8 is pretty damn good. So I'll give that question to you now.
This is a more complex question than it seems on the surface, because back to the cognitive problem. If you're in the mid-range of the cognitive distribution as the principal in a family, and you have somebody that is 2 standard deviations above you in cognitive capacity, you're barely going to understand anything they have to say. And you need somebody close in that's 1 standard deviation above you who can talk to them and then talk to you. So it's been my experience that, and this has been some conversations out there, you're absolutely right. You need those high cognitive capacity people, and they are in rare. One, they're not motivated by money normally. They do get paid very well because they're very capable. It has been my experience, however, that even in special operations units and in companies we were invested in, et cetera, you actually want most of the people in that company, depending on the domain in which they're operating, to be within 2 standard deviations of intelligence from one another, from the lowest person in the company to the highest. Because otherwise, you've got unbelievable communication problems and understanding problems you're just not going to be able to overcome. Now, you need to be able to reach into that highest level person, but unless you're up in that 80% or higher in the cognitive capacities, it's probably not going to work for you. Unless you've got somebody, again, real close to you that's only 1 standard deviation from them and you, then you can do it.
We might have indirectly touched on it with kind of the testosterone and estrogen discussion, but you also bring up another problem you define as the hypergamy problem. What do you mean?
Back to the estrogen. Estrogen drives everything. Everything. I don't know a single billionaire man in my life that doesn't have to answer to his wife. So don't tell. And statistically, 100%. Over 2 generations, over 80% and 90% in some communities of assets are actually directly owned and controlled by women. So that's just a fact, right? But even in a generation where a man may have built and created and he may be the dominant, he's still got to answer to his wife, his daughter, his sister, his mother, his you know what I mean? There's some estrogen-based person in that life that he has to answer to.
When I hear the word hypergamy, I think of effectively a little bit of moving up, a little bit of marrying the best person, male and or female, that's going to put my children, my family, my legacy in the best position. Now, money to succeed. Money could help. It also can mean looks. It can mean status. It can mean power, connectivity. I guess it means a lot of different things, EM.
Status. Women are wired to marry across and up in status. The great problem we have today, the hypergamy problem we have today in the merchant prince era, is that status is equated with money, and that's not the case. Real status often has nothing to do with money. And there's a whole lot of people with a whole lot of money, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions, that actually are low status people in the real world. You might have a lot of money. You don't have any status. You're not going to sit at the right tables. You're not going to get the right invites. You're not going to provide that upper mobility and access for the children of some woman. And so a lot of women have been distracted by, but real capable status women that really do drive the world, they know this. They might have some problems with it when they're younger, but when they get to a certain age, they realize, a status male is a male with with relationships with people with real status. Pick up, again, back to what I was saying. People might not have much money, probably don't even care about money, aren't motivated by it, but they can pick up the phone and some shit happens somewhere in the world.
And I believe the last one that you note for now is the citizen problem. What did you mean by that?
Well, historically, when a regime is threatened by its own people because it's become too parasitic, it replaces its own people. And then it ensures that it employs in its military and its arms of enforcement non-citizens who are willing to do violence against citizens. This is just historic. This is again and again and again and again. And oh, by the way, on the other side of that, if you are a citizen, an actual citizen, it's not just because you were born there. It's because you actually contribute and participate and recognize the DIMEFIL yourself or whatever status hierarchy you are. And you work hard with your peers to ensure that the infinite game is being played and the eternal war is being held off as much as it can be held off. And that means that there's upward mobility for more and more people, and there's less parasitism upon more and more people.
EM, what could I say? And by the way, to the audience that was active asking questions, I appreciate you. Tom, you were very active today. Thank you so much. And yes, an interesting comment. And agreed, we covered things today that are perhaps a little different than you're used to hearing, specifically in something that traditionally is more investing or family office centric. But this all comes back to continuity and why I created an organization called SFO Continuity. And the value of what that is, it's deeper. And like EM said, it's deeper than just the money that you may have or may inherit as an heir. There's lots of different factors that go into continuity. It's a very deep subject. And there are certain topics with what's going on around the world today that are a little on the sensitive side, that maybe even a year or two ago are probably things that I probably would have been better off not even mentioning. Fortunately, things may have gotten a little better, where at least, again, we could have a discussion. And if I'm wrong or we're wrong, we learn. We already know what we don't know. Let's attempt to know what we don't know. Perhaps I could argue strong opinions, but weakly held. A little bit like playing poker, although that's going to be more in the confines of a game and a rule. As new information comes in, it causes us to think differently and to adapt, to iterate, to change. So I think these are important conversations for those of wealth, aspirational to wealth, those that are in the family office, or those that service the family office to have. And no, I do not think these conversations are happening, not even privately, but definitely not more externally in the community. Either people are ignorant and don't know what they don't know, which is very likely, or simply they're too afraid. And one of the greatest things that I've noticed in incredible families, and actually, EM, maybe this is good for you to comment on, then I'll allow you to do a close before I wrap up. We need more lions in this world. What I mean by that, and it's not even necessarily per se a masculinity and a femininity thing, it's we need more courage. And the importance of encouraging courageous behaviors in your heirs is important. If there's not necessarily a fear or something that could go wrong, then really how courageous is it? Now, some of that needs to be mitigated and hedged. I'm not saying look at that blindly as black and white. But in my work of traveling the world, of knowing thousands of families over decades, those that do have continuity, that do sustain, it is deeper than even just governance, that in some ways how decisions are made could be a little superficial. It is deeper than that. It's culture. And some of that does relate to the culture that is inbred in the family, that is taught within the generations, including being courageous. So all of you that thought that I was only investing or structural focused, you were very, very wrong. Now, do I outline a lot of my more public content from that perspective? Yes, because it reaches a larger group of audience and many of you are interested in it. But the concept of families of wealth, of billionaires, of how they progress, of how they make decisions, all of that is very, very integral to the concepts that I'm talking about, which is really continuity and deeper than just simply wealth. So this might have been a little bit of a different discussion, kind of well over 2 hours than you kind of expected. EM, had a little bit of a Wi-Fi issue, so hopefully he'll be able to log back in a minute, and I could give him a chance to do another closing comment. He's a friend. He's one of my dream team. He is a resource. I have many resources in sovereign risk and disaster preparedness. He's among the most intellectual ones. So I'm very happy to kind of share the content, and hopefully you enjoy the interview. As noted, more than anything else, I'm like a seeker of information, and then hopefully some of you get some value and enjoy it as well. Do go and subscribe to my Family Office on YouTube and Family Office TV. So I have 2 platforms on YouTube. LinkedIn, I'm probably technically the most active. I will hope to start to be more active on X, or AKA Twitter. We shall see. And simply go to angelorobles.com and learn more about me and what I do from a consultative perspective, and through my membership group, SFO Continuity, that I have mentioned, and join, be a part of it, be interactive in the private things that we do, including with people like EM, where certain things we can't really or want to talk about more publicly. It's the opportunity for us to share it in more of a private digital Zoom or an in-person gathering. So go to angelorobles.com and feel free to learn more and just jump in and start to participate. EM, I'm going to give, thank you for coming back, the final commentary to you. And if you don't mind, again, how people can reach out to you. I'll give it to you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Appreciate it. And I appreciate the conversation, Angelo. I always enjoy those, even when we have our private conversations. Best thing, again, LinkedIn or Twitter. You can do a Google search, EM Burlingame, or of course, just reach out to Angelo. I am using Twitter less and less to give cocktail recipes and horse lassoing and riding lessons, and more about these types of things, because the world is we are getting to a place to where we are going to have to start playing at a higher level, every one of us. So I'm using Twitter to kind of have that conversation. And then the books I'm writing, The Eternal Wars on Amazon, The Art of Being a Man's on Amazon, and then the novel series, Azrael Burns, is on Locals. Shouldering Giants is the channel on Locals. And then I have a YouTube channel that we're doing now, which is The New Nobility. With respect to the, kind of a summation of the thinking, we have to put human relationships back as the primary purpose of our lives, in our portfolios, and our family office planning, our multi-generational family office planning. The last 30 years, we've been building a relationship with the machine. We need to stop that. Now, we need to keep working with the machine and benefit from the capacities the machine provides and the opportunities it provides. But we need to stop building relationships with the world of the machine. We need to get back to building relationships with human beings in our own communities, around us, surrounding us. We need to get back to being human. If there was anything that might preserve us, no matter what's going on in our descendants, is that we have personal relationships in the communities in which we live, and not just with people who look or sound or come from our socioeconomic class, and not through our nonprofits or our charitable giving or our political activism, etc. This has to be personal, face-to-face. When was the last time you took the doorman to dinner? When was the last time you got medical treatment for the child of one of your security guys who's very ill, or who has a speech impediment, or whose wife has cancer? Do you even know? What about that person who works in your, you know what I mean? So the thing is that we've so over relied on these systems that we built, is we've disconnected from people, name by name, face to face help. And if your family is going to be safe and secure across generations, it is only human beings that are going to make that possible. And it's not the obvious ones. It's not the guys that come from my world or, one of my worlds, or the tattooed sleeve bearded guys that, run around in kit and look cool. It's going to be random people in the community that give a shit about you personally.
EM, what could I say? That was an amazing summary and ending. This was an incredible opportunity for me to learn, and hopefully my audience got value out of it. I greatly appreciate your friendship and me being kind of an apprentice relative to your mentorship on some of the really advanced work to help add to me. I always have the verbiage of no matter where you are, think like a white belt, be buried in your white belt, inspire others to be lifelong learners. And like I said earlier, maybe have strong opinions, even I could debate that, but be willing, weekly held as new information comes in. And a little bit like our acquaintance Adam Robinson had said in the past of my interviews, how the world works is, we could argue, different now. If what you learned in a certain structure or school teaches you to think linearly in a similar way to others that are in a decision-making authority, what happens when that is adapted, when that changes and you don't adapt with it? It's very bad. So again, it's more than just the investing front. It's deeper thinking on critical problems that I really enjoy, and hopefully you enjoyed me being a seeker of information here. Again, thank you, audience, as always. And EM Burlingame, you're the best. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Pleasure, Angelo. You take care. Everybody take care. Cheers.
Bye.